And without further ado, I will turn it over to tonight's presenter, which is Jim. And Jim, please go ahead.
Like Shav said, I'm a member of the Sequoia Club, and I'm also a past president. And we begin every year with what we call past presidents presentations. And so a couple of us ex-presidents did this presentation at the beginning of the year. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do a presentation on, I happened to come across an article, and it was in the American Stamp Dealers and Collectors magazine, and it was on the A.E.F, the American Expeditionary Force in Siberia. Now, I'm a history teacher, and I've taken a lot of history classes, but I don't think I've ever really found a lot of information on this previously. I hadn't really heard of this event. And so I thought, well, this will be interesting to look into. And so I did a little research, and I found out that in August of 1918 until March of 1920, we had American soldiers in Siberia. There were about 8,000 of them, and they were under the command of Major General William Graves. And the reason they were there, they were sent there by President Wilson for a couple of reasons. One was for the protection of the railroad. The Trans-Siberian Railroad was a very important lifeline across Russia, and we wanted to make sure that that was under control. And remember that at this point, Russia had withdrawn from World War I, and so there was a lot of concern about sort of a reason behind the scenes was we might be able to help the white armies in their struggle against the communist forces. There were a lot of supplies that had been sent into that area to help Russia when they were an ally in World War I. So we wanted to make sure that we secured those supplies. And we also wanted to assist the evacuation of about 40,000 Czech troops who had been held prisoner. They had been on the German side in the war, not to their liking, but they were forced to fight for Germany, and they were captured, and they were held as prisoners in the Soviet Union. And they actually, they wanted to get back through Vladivostok back to the front, the Eastern Front, in order to fight against the Germans. So we were very concerned about those troops, and those are the reasons that Wilson gave. There was also kind of a concern because the Japanese were having forces in that area. We wanted to make sure that that we kept everything under control there, that we knew what was going on. I was mostly concerned about the postal history of this event. There were over 1,000 covers and postcards that were sent home from soldiers who were in Siberia. The expert in this field is a woman by the name of Edith Falstick. She wrote a book called The Siberian Sojourn, and all of her research papers and her diaries and all of her interviews with the soldiers, she was a marvelous postal historian, were donated by her family to Stanford University. So all of that information is available in the archives at Stanford. Picture of the troops that were marching through Vladivostok. You can see the American soldiers were there. It's a postcard from Siberia, and you can see the postcard says, "Season's greetings from Lieutenant Fred St. Goar, 11/17/18." It's soldier's mail, which means there was no postage required. It has a circular date stamp, U.S. Postal Agency in Siberia. And it also has a censorship mark, A.E.F. Siberia censorship marking. And what's interesting is that the postcard was written by Fred St. Goar, and it was also censored by him. I guess that's to make sure that there's no information in the postcard that if it fell into the hands of the enemy, they could use that. So a lot of the mail coming back from Siberia always was censored. Notice that it was written to Mr. and Mrs. Perry Eyre. Now the Eyres, they were a very wealthy family, descendants of the Athertons. And where the cards that I have came to me through a friend of mine who was the secretary at Sequoia High School where I was working, and her father was a gardener for a family in Atherton, and this family was the Madison family, and they were descendants of the Athertons, and there was a real intermixing of the families. It was Athertons and Eyres and Selbys and McCondries. They were all very wealthy, and they did a lot of traveling between, say, the turn of the century and the 1930s. And they have a lot of postcards that were in the collection that came from overseas. People, their friends like to travel, and they always send a postcard back. But these ones here are special. In fact, there's a postcard very similar to this one I just saw this morning on Cherrystone auction that sold, I think it was $140. So the value of these postcards is very nice. Now, on the other side of the postcard, this is the side that probably postcard people are more interested in, the picture side than in the writing side. The stamp collectors and the postal historians like the markings on the writing side. I think your club probably likes the photo side. This is a photo of Lieutenant St. Goar in his quarters. And he was born. One of the things about the internet today is you can find out so much information. Even if you can't, I couldn't quite make out his name, but I came close, and you can kind of play around with it. Eventually you can locate people. And I found out that he was born in Germany in 1890. So he was 28 years old at this time. He came from a very wealthy family. His family was in the sugar business, and they had plantations in Hawaii. His mother was an Oppenheimer. So he was also from a very wealthy family in the San Francisco area. So my question about how is he sending a postcard to Mrs. Eyre, I think that's the connection, is that their family is very, very close as he was growing up in the city. And in fact, the Eyres had a daughter by the name of Elena, who was about his age, so there may have been some romance going on there too. The next card, this is a postcard of Vladivostok. It was a port city, and it was the terminus of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, so a very important city. It was controlled by the White Army, but all around there was pretty much chaos. There was Cossacks, and there was communist force, Red Army forces, and there were White Army forces, and there were mercenaries. The city was full of refugees, so it was kind of crazy around there at this time. General Graves really didn't think that he was sent there to fight against the Red Army, so he tried to avoid as much conflict as he could. During this time, there were, I think, more people that had been killed because of the weather than because of the fighting. There was another expedition that was sent to Archangel in the north of Russia, and this was called the Polar Bear Expedition, and they actually did more fighting. They had 239 deaths in the 9 months that they were there, whereas the next postcard, Siberia area, 35 soldiers were killed, 52 were wounded in that I gave contained quite a few postcards. This is a written side of the previous postcard, and it is from a Sergeant Grover Van Rossum. Also marked U.S. Postal Agency, Siberia, with the CDS 11/15/18. And notice at this time, World War I is over. The war is already over, but these troops are staying there while the other troops from the European side are coming back. They're still stationed in Siberia because of all the issues that were going on there. The card arrived in Menlo Park on 12/11/18. And so the connection here, it wasn't because of Sergeant Grover coming from a wealthy family. The clue is that Mrs. Eyre, and then just below that, you see NDC. And NDC stands for the National Defenders Club. And it says say hello to Miss Eyre, who was Elena Eyre, the daughter of, she was 22-year-old daughter of Mrs. Percy Eyre. This postcard here, it mentions the NDC, the National Defenders Club. It says in the writing, I am at the National Defenders Club tonight. Great place, fun of all sorts. Sort of like what entertained the troops in World War II, I think, where they would provide them with entertainment while they were training. The mystery I have, and maybe somebody in your club can help me solve it, is it has a CDS mailed from Burlingame, 6/4/18, has a cancellation, but it doesn't have an address. It says, hello bunch from Paige. The photo on the next card is from the YMCA building in Menlo Park. It says, this is the YMCA where I always write from. It's about a half a block from our tents. Had canteen for soldiers to relax, local people. When they decided to bring soldiers into the area, Stanford University and a lot of the local people were really worried about their young women. What would happen to all their young women when these lusty soldiers came in to train in their area? This is actually a cover. This is the National League for Women's Service. It's a cover to Mrs. Eyre. And that was a civilian volunteer organization that was founded in 1917 in conjunction with the Red Cross to provide stateside war service, such as feeding, caring for, transporting soldiers. And a quote I found was that the League was particularly attractive to young socialites who had time and money to donate. So that's where the Eyres fit right into this story. This next slide is a postal card. It's to Mrs. Eyre, and it was sent from San Mateo, California. It has a patriotic flag cancel. I'm not sure how your postcard club views postal cards. There's a big distinction between the two. There's no pictures on these cards, but it's very interesting. On the printed side of the postal card, it's from Mrs. Lewis P. Hobart, chairman of the National League for Women's Service of San Mateo County. And she states that they will be conducting a canning kitchen, and they're seeking donations of fruits and berries and glasses and jars. And they can be picked up by their motor division. That's one of the things that they provided, was transportation. And these canned goods will be distributed to the base hospital at Camp Fremont and to the National Defenders Club in Menlo Park. So everything is kind of coming together now. This is Camp Fremont. Camp Fremont, this is an inspection in front of the tents at Camp Fremont. The Army leased 68,000 acres between San Carlos and Los Altos. And the reason they did, because they felt the terrain was similar to the terrain in France, and it was excellent for artillery practice. 28,000 men trained at Camp Fremont. 5,000 of the soldiers who were sent to Siberia came out of Camp Fremont. None of the soldiers ever went to Europe. The ones who didn't go to Siberia were transferred to other camps or served out their time in the United States, because the war ended before their training did. Most of the men didn't see combat. However, many died from the pandemic flu epidemic of 1918. On the other side of this card, this is a postcard written side to Mrs.
He's saying something that's not true.
Mr. Ginther, and he's in Williams, California. This came from Camp Fremont, postmark in Palo Alto, 11/4/1918. It was sent by Nay Milton Salter. He was a first lieutenant, graduated from Northwestern University in 1911. And his comments in the letter that we're having beautiful weather here. There's lots of drilling, lots of lectures. And he said over 3,000 cases of influenza. He was a doctor and he was treating the fellows who had become ill. And after the troops left for Siberia, then he was transferred to another base. So this is a monument at Fremont Park today. You'll find it in downtown Menlo Park at Santa Cruz University Avenue. It's you'll still find artifacts there from Camp Fremont. In fact, up where the dish is, up in Stanford University, they used to fire artillery shells out towards Portola Valley. And as late as 2010, they were finding 75mm shells out in Portola Valley. So none of these troops from Fremont Park, from Fremont camp were ever sent to Europe. The war ended in 1918. The camp closed April 1920. The buildings were auctioned off. If you've ever been to Menlo Park, there was a place, a burger and grill joint called the Oasis. That was one of the leftover buildings that they turned into a little restaurant. If you want to find more information about Camp Fremont, you can find a book by Barbara Wilcox, World War I Army Training by San Francisco Bay. It's the story of Camp Fremont. And this kind of concludes things because we started out in Redwood City and read a magazine article and went off to Siberia. And then we came back to Atherton and the Athertons and the Selbys and the rich families here. And then we found the National Defenders Club. We found Camp Fremont, and we end up in our own backyard, right back at a park today in Menlo Park. And that's what I like about collecting stamps. I really like the postal history aspect of collecting. Maybe I can talk Sean into agreeing that the back side of the cards sometimes are as interesting as the front side of the cards. Anyway, that concludes the presentation. If you have any questions, I can try to answer.
This is Mark Moss. I have something to share.
Good.
I'm going to try to bring it as close to my, gosh, let me see if I can bring this as close as possible to my camera. All right, anyway, I'm going to read it. It says, compliments of the American Red Cross, Siberia, Christmas 1919. How am I going to get this to focus, though? It's not postcard
Right there,
size.
that's not bad right there.
Okay, it's not postcard size. It's about 2 inches by 3 inches, I'm going to say. On the back side, you can see that it was in somebody's album. You can see the I guess it would have been, you know, the four corners, and somebody would have pasted it into an album. I'm not sure if it's a business card. What would you call this? But anyway, it's a Red Cross card, and I picked this up at an antique store in San Francisco a few years ago before COVID. It was along with a bunch of other postcards, and I really like this. So I think it would have been, you know, part of that same group of soldiers or people in Siberia. Is this something that you've seen? Anything? I'm trying to give it as much focus as I can.
It's a nice artifact.
Mark, but I don't think anybody has recognized it as far as being able to find one or seeing one.
Right. I
That's
just thought
interesting.
I would share it because, again, I think it's in the same sort of category as what we're talking about tonight here.
That's terrific.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Jim, I noticed that I was on mute, but answering your question about the front and the back of the card, I, for one, always enjoy reading the card more than not more than looking at the picture. I like that too. But as you know, I've written a few articles on cards, and to do that, you have to look at the back of the card. So I understand your position completely. So anyway,
Yeah,
all right.
I just wanted to say, this is Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that's fascinating. And I was just researching Camp Fremont a little bit because my grandfather went there
Wow.
around that time. And anyway, I just think your presentation was very, very interesting. So thank you.
It's kind of an unknown period in American history. You know, not too many people know about this event.
That's right. I'm just wondering if anybody in the audience has anything to ask, please come on up, Dave. Dave's going to come up and ask you a question.
Yeah, it's less of a question, and thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. My grandpa, when I went through his papers, and he was born in 1896, he went into the Army from Brooklyn, New York, and he was discharged. And for so many years, I had no idea what this deal was, his discharge papers from Camp Fremont, California.
Huh.
So he was discharged because the war ended,
Right.
but his one of the things that he wrote in a letter is he thought before he was discharged that he was going to be going out to Siberia. That's something he thought. It was just a line, and I had no context when I read this stuff years back. And then, and you're right with the presentation. I used to work for San Mateo County, and I've dealt with homeowners who lived in houses. One of them was a relocated officers' quarters from Camp Fremont in the Menlo Park suburban area. So there were lots of those buildings that got relocated all over the place, and some of them were quite small, but it was cheap to relocate, and there weren't a lot of streets and traffic, and they did that. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was great.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else have anything that they want to ask or any questions that Jim might be able to answer for you? Doesn't look like that's the case. Looks like we're good.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for the
taking
invite,
the
Sheldon.
time to do it. I appreciate it. Jim did a great job. I was fortunate enough to be able to see this talk when he originally gave it to the Sequoia Club, and I thought, boy, this is something that would be educational and fun for us at the Postcard Club to learn as well. So I'm glad that he agreed to take the time to do it.
So it's
So
been a while since the original presentation, so I've probably slipping on some of the details that I gave during the first presentation, but it's something that I think it's going to be an ongoing research project because it's so interesting to me to delve into this.
it really is. It really is. I had no idea that we were involved over there, especially after the end of the war. That was all news to me. So it was great. Good piece of history for all of us. Well, thanks a lot, folks, for joining us. I appreciate it, and see you next month.